What would you do if you discovered your billionaire husband was taking his Instagram mistress to Paris Fashion Week while you sat home? 7 months pregnant and alone. Sarah Mitchell thought she knew the answer. She thought she'd cry, beg, maybe hire a divorce lawyer and hope for the best. She was wrong. Because when Sarah found those boarding passes on her husband's desk, when she saw the $50,000 jewelry receipts for gifts she'd never received, when she realized David had been systematically stealing their shared assets to fund his affair, something cold and calculating awakened inside her. You see, David made one fatal mistake. He forgot that his decorative wife used to manage $60 million portfolios on Wall Street before he convinced her to give up everything for their marriage. He forgot that quiet doesn't mean weak, and he definitely forgot that the most dangerous person in any room is the one whose strength you consistently underestimate. What happened next broke the internet, destroyed a tech empire, and proved that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad or getting even. Sometimes the best revenge is getting rich, getting powerful, and getting justice for every woman who's ever been told she's worth less than she knows she is. This is the story of how one underestimated woman turned her husband's cruelest betrayal into his most devastating nightmare. Buckle up, because this gets wild. Sarah Mitchell pressed her hand against her swollen belly as she sat alone in the sterile ultrasound room, watching her 7-month-old daughter move on the grainy monitor. The technician had left her with printed photos and congratulations, but the chair beside her remained empty. David had promised to be here for this appointment, their first clear look at their baby girl's face. Her phone buzzed with his familiar tone. "Emergency board meeting ran long, babe. Everything good with the baby, love you." Sarah stared at the text message, then at the ultrasound photo in her trembling hand. The same David who could negotiate billion-dollar mergers in 3 time zones couldn't spare 2 hours for his unborn daughter's first portrait. She traced the outline of their baby's face with her finger, memorizing features that looked remarkably like her own mother's baby photos. The drive home through Connecticut's winding roads felt longer than usual. Their colonial mansion sat on 5 pristine acres, complete with a pool Sarah hadn't used in months and gardens maintained by staff she rarely saw. Everything perfect, everything empty. The house echoed with the kind of silence that came from living alone while married, a contradiction that had become her reality over the past year. Inside, David's home office door stood ajar. Sarah rarely entered his sanctuary of mahogany and leather, where deals worth hundreds of millions were negotiated and empires were built. But something glinted from his desk that made her pause in the hallway, her pregnant body swaying slightly from the weight of carrying their child and the burden of carrying their marriage alone. A Tiffany receipt, carelessly left beside his laptop. $50,000 for a diamond necklace, purchased yesterday while she was at her doctor's appointment learning about their daughter's development. The timestamp on the receipt showed 3:15 p.m., exactly when she'd been lying on the examination table, hoping her husband would walk through the door. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she picked up the receipt with fingers that had once moved confidently across trading floors and through boardrooms. The necklace wasn't for her. She would have remembered $50,000 worth of diamonds, especially when she'd been asking David for months to consider hiring a doula for their birth. Her financial analyst training kicked in automatically as she began shuffling through the other papers on David's desk. American Express statements showed a pattern that made her stomach clench with recognition. Dinners at restaurants David claimed he was too busy to take her to, always for 2 people, always at the most romantic establishments in Manhattan. Hotel charges for rooms in cities where he supposedly had solo business meetings, upgraded to suites that screamed romance rather than business necessity. Shopping sprees at Agent Provocateur for lingerie that had never appeared in her drawer, charges at florists for arrangements she'd never received, wine purchases from vintages he claimed to be saving for special occasions that never seemed to arrive. Each receipt was a small betrayal, but together they painted a picture that made her legs feel weak. But it was the boarding passes that shattered her world completely. 2 first-class tickets to Paris. Departure tomorrow morning. David Mitchell and Jessica Romano. The names were printed in the airline's crisp font, as official and undeniable as a death certificate for her marriage. Sarah's legs gave out. She sank into David's leather chair, the same chair where he'd held her hand and promised to be the kind of father he'd never had, the kind of husband who would never make her feel alone. The boarding passes blurred as tears she'd been holding back for months finally broke free. Jessica Romano. The woman who would be flying to Paris Fashion Week was Sarah's husband, while Sarah remained home. 7 months pregnant and apparently invisible. The woman whose existence Sarah had sensed for months in the subtle changes in David's behavior. The way he guarded his phone, the mysterious calls he took in other rooms, the sudden interest in upgrading his wardrobe and improving his fitness routine. With shaking fingers, Sarah opened David's laptop. She knew his passwords too well, a artifact from their early marriage when they'd shared everything and had no secrets. He'd always used the same pattern, the name of what mattered most to him, plus the year it became important to his life. She tried Cloud Tech 2019, the year he founded his company and their lives changed forever. Wrong. Sarah 2021, their wedding year, when he'd promised her that building their empire together would be the adventure of their lives. Wrong again. Then, with growing dread that felt like ice water in her veins, she tried Jessica 2024. The laptop unlocked. Sarah's world tilted as she stared at David's desktop, filled with folders she'd never seen before and applications she didn't recognize. Her financial analyst training kicked in as she began navigating through his files, approaching this devastating discovery with the same methodical precision she'd once used to analyze failing companies and predict market crashes. What she found was worse than simple infidelity. This wasn't a man having a midlife crisis or a momentary lapse in judgment. David hadn't just been cheating on her. He'd been systematically erasing her from their shared life, planning her destruction with the same strategic thinking he applied to hostile corporate takeovers. Their joint investment accounts, worth over $15 million, had been quietly transferred to individual accounts in David's name only. The transfers had happened gradually over the past 6 months, small enough amounts that she wouldn't notice unless she was specifically looking for them. The house deed, originally in both their names as a symbol of their partnership, had been changed to his sole ownership through a legal maneuver she didn't understand but recognized as financially devastating. Even her beloved jewelry collection, inherited from her grandmother and worth nearly $2 million, had been moved to a safety deposit box she couldn't access. According to insurance records, David had claimed the pieces needed better security, but the new box was registered only in his name. The cruelest discovery came in a folder marked Legal Consultation. Months of emails between David and a divorce attorney discussing strategy for protecting assets in case of marriage dissolution. The lawyer's advice was coldly professional, establish grounds for sole custody based on the mother's emotional instability during pregnancy, document any erratic behavior, and ensure all significant assets were beyond her reach before filing. David wasn't just planning to leave her. He was planning to take their daughter and ensure Sarah left the marriage with nothing but the clothes on her back and whatever small bank account he deemed appropriate for his former wife's survival. The emails detailed a timeline that made Sarah's blood freeze. David planned to file for divorce within 2 weeks of their daughter's birth, claiming that postpartum depression made Sarah unfit for custody. His lawyer had researched precedents where courts awarded full custody to fathers who could prove maternal instability, especially when the father could provide significantly better financial security. Sarah scrolled through more files, each one revealing another layer of David's betrayal. He'd hired a private investigator to document her daily activities, looking for evidence of anything that could be used against her in court. He'd consulted with a forensic accountant about hiding assets offshore. He'd even researched boarding schools in Switzerland where he could send their daughter once she was old enough, places where Sarah would have no legal rights and minimal access. This wasn't just infidelity. This was financial abuse, psychological manipulation, and premeditated destruction of everything Sarah thought she knew about her life. Sarah's cursor hovered over the name Jessica Romano as her world continued to tilt on its axis. She clicked on the browser icon, and Instagram exploded across her screen in a cascade of bronze skin, designer bikinis, and carefully curated luxury that made her pregnant body feel clumsy and obsolete. Jessica Romano, 24 years old, 3.2 million followers, based in Miami. Her bio read like a manifesto of modern female empowerment, wrapped in consumerism, lifestyle influencer, fashion enthusiast, entrepreneur, living my best life with my mystery man. Sarah began scrolling through months of posts, each one a knife twist that revealed more about her husband's double life than years of marriage had. Jessica at exclusive restaurants Sarah recognized from David's credit card statements, posing with wine glasses and designer plates while Sarah ate alone in their Connecticut mansion. Jessica wearing jewelry that looked suspiciously similar to pieces David claimed were business gifts for important clients. Expensive watches and diamond earrings that caught light in ways that suggested serious money behind them. Jessica posting cryptic captions about being grateful for someone who makes all her dreams come true, accompanied by photos of first-class airplane seats and luxury hotel suites that David claimed were necessary for business, but had never included his wife. Each post garnered thousands of comments from followers who lived vicariously through Jessica's seemingly perfect life. Women who praised her mystery man for treating her like a queen. The comments were almost worse than the posts themselves. Hundreds of women writing about how jealous they were, how they wished they could find a man who spoiled them the way Jessica's mystery boyfriend did. Sarah found herself reading every comment, torturing herself with the praise being heaped on her husband by strangers who had no idea he was married to a pregnant woman sitting alone in Connecticut. But it was the recent posts that made Sarah's blood freeze in her veins. Photos from a private jet with the caption, "So excited for my mystery man to take me somewhere special." A designer suitcase being packed with the hashtag Paris Here I Come, a manicure featuring French tips with tiny Eiffel Tower designs, and the caption, "Can't wait to see the city of light with my favorite person." Jessica Romano wasn't just David's mistress, she was his public mistress, broadcasting their relationship to millions while Sarah hid her pregnancy complications and marriage problems behind closed doors. Jessica was everything Sarah used to be before marriage changed her: confident, independent, unafraid to take up space in the world. Sarah found herself studying Jessica's face in photo after photo, trying to understand what David saw in this woman that he couldn't find in his wife. Jessica was undeniably beautiful, but it was more than that. She radiated the kind of joy and enthusiasm that Sarah remembered feeling before she'd traded her corner office for a golden cage. Before she'd learned that being the perfect billionaire's wife meant making herself smaller, so her husband could appear larger. In Jessica's posts, Sarah could see echoes of who she used to be. The woman who'd graduated summa cum laude from Stanford, who'd landed a job at Goldman Sachs through pure merit, who'd once negotiated deals worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. Jessica had the same hungry look in her eyes, the same determination to succeed, the same refusal to apologize for wanting more than what life had initially offered. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. David hadn't chosen Jessica, despite Sarah's qualities. He'd chosen Jessica because she reminded him of Sarah before marriage had domesticated her. He was cheating on his wife with a younger version of the woman his wife used to be. Sarah's phone rang, David's ringtone cutting through her devastating research like a blade. She stared at his name on the screen, knowing that answering would require her to pretend everything was normal while her world crumbled around her. "Hey, beautiful, how did the appointment go?" His voice carried the false cheerfulness of a man with secrets, the same tone he'd used when he'd started coming home late and claiming emergency board meetings. "Everything's fine with the baby," Sarah managed, her voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "She's healthy and growing perfectly. The doctor says she should arrive right on schedule." "That's wonderful news. I can't wait to meet our little princess." The endearment that had once made her heart flutter now sounded hollow. Words he was saying because he was supposed to say them, not because he felt them. "Listen, I have some tough news about tomorrow. The Paris expansion deal hit a major snag, and I need to fly out first thing in the morning to handle it personally." Paris. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the lie wash over her like acid. She could see Jessica's Instagram posts in her mind, the excited captions about mysterious trips and romantic getaways. And now she knew exactly what story David would tell to justify his absence. "How long will you be gone?" she asked, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Probably a week, maybe 2. I know the timing is terrible with you being so close to your due date, but this deal could be worth hundreds of millions for cloud tech. The European market is finally ready for our data analytics platform, and if we don't move now, our competitors will get there first." Sarah listened to David weave his elaborate lie with the same skill he used to pitch investors and charm board members. Every detail was carefully crafted to sound plausible. Every excuse designed to make her feel selfish for questioning his priorities. This was the same man who'd convinced venture capitalists to invest billions in his vision. now using those same persuasion skills to manipulate his pregnant wife. You understand? Right, David continued, his voice carrying just enough vulnerability to make her feel guilty for doubting him. I hate leaving you alone right now, but this could secure our daughter's entire future. Everything I'm doing is for our family. Sarah understood perfectly. David was extending his romantic vacation with Jessica and expecting his pregnant wife to smile and accept it. He was using their daughter as justification for abandoning both of them, turning his betrayal into an act of paternal love. Of course I understand, she said, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. Business comes first. It always has. You're amazing, Sarah. I'm so lucky to have a wife who gets it. I'll make it up to you when I get back. I promise. Maybe we can take a baby moon somewhere tropical after the baby's born. After David hung up, Sarah sat in his office chair, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal and the sound of promises he had no intention of keeping. The ultrasound photo lay on his desk next to the boarding passes, a stark reminder of what he was abandoning and who he was choosing instead. Sarah had spent 2 years being the perfect billionaire's wife. She'd given up her career as a financial analyst, traded her Manhattan apartment for David's Connecticut estate, and transformed herself into the kind of woman who looked good at charity galas and asked no uncomfortable questions about late nights at the office. She'd been so focused on being what David wanted that she'd forgotten who she used to be. But as Sarah stared at Jessica Romano's Instagram feed, something cold and calculating began to unfurl in her chest. The same instincts that had made her successful on Wall Street, the same analytical mind that could spot market manipulations and predatory business practices from miles away. David thought he was playing chess while she played house. He had no idea she was about to flip the entire board and play a game he'd never seen before, using rules he'd never learned and strategies he'd never imagined his decorative wife could master. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in 2 years, her fingers moving automatically through digits she'd memorized during her Goldman Sachs days, but had been too proud to use since becoming David's wife. Mike Chen's office. How may I help you? Mike, it's Sarah Mitchell. I need to ask you about those alternative investment strategies you mentioned at Jennifer's wedding. Are you still doing boutique financial consulting? A pause that stretched long enough for Sarah to imagine Mike's surprise. Sarah, holy hell, I thought you disappeared into billionaire wife land forever. Yeah, I'm still doing specialized investments. High risk, high reward stuff for clients who want to get creative with their portfolios. Why? Sarah looked around David's office, taking in the awards on his walls and the photos of him with tech industry leaders, none of which included her. Because I'm about to become a very motivated investor with some very specific targets. Are you free for dinner tonight? For you always. But Sarah, you sound different. Like, really different. Sarah stared at her reflection in David's computer screen, seeing a woman she barely recognized. Tired, yes. But there was something else there now. Something sharp and focused that had been dormant for too long. I'm not different, Mike. I'm just awake. Sarah chose the restaurant carefully, a quiet bistro in Westport, far from the social circles where she might be recognized as David Mitchell's pregnant wife, but upscale enough that her designer maternity dress wouldn't look out of place. She needed to look like a serious businesswoman, not a desperate housewife seeking revenge through retail therapy. Mike Chen had barely changed since their Goldman Sachs days, though the years had been kind to him. Still sharp-suited, still carrying himself like a man who could smell profit from 3 blocks away and identify market inefficiencies before they became obvious to slower competitors. But his eyes widened when he saw Sarah walk into the restaurant, her hand protectively over her belly and something dangerous flickering behind her perfectly applied makeup. Jesus, Sarah, you look like you've seen a ghost. I have, Sarah said, sliding into the booth across from him with the careful movements of a woman whose body was carrying more than just a baby. My own. She dressed carefully for this meeting, choosing an understated navy maternity dress that concealed the full extent of her pregnancy while making her look professional rather than vulnerable. Minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a style that said serious businesswoman rather than decorative wife. The transformation felt like putting on armor she'd forgotten she owned. Tell me about the boutique investment strategies, Sarah said without preamble, her voice carrying the no-nonsense tone that had once intimidated junior analysts and impressed senior partners. Mike leaned back, studying her with the same intensity he'd once used to analyze market trends and identify emerging opportunities. Straight to business. I missed this version of you. He signaled the waiter for wine, then remembered her condition and switched to sparkling water. It's high-risk, high-reward investing. We find opportunities that traditional firms won't touch because they're too creative, too emotional, or too far outside conventional wisdom. What kind of opportunities? Art acquisitions, small businesses with disruptive potential, emerging markets that Wall Street doesn't understand yet. Some of our investments have returned 3,000%, others have gone to zero. It's not for people who need guaranteed returns or predictable timelines. Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling through the screenshots she'd taken of Jessica Romano's Instagram feed. She showed Mike a photo of Jessica at a fashion industry event, draped over David in a picture she'd found buried in the comments section of another influencer's post. What if I told you I wanted to target specific markets, specifically the fashion industry that caters to social media influencers? Mike's eyebrows shot up, and Sarah could see him switching into the analytical mode that had made him successful in alternative investments. That's oddly specific and potentially brilliant. The influencer fashion market is completely oversaturated with cheap knockoffs and fast fashion brands that have no staying power. But a luxury brand that could capture that aesthetic while offering real quality and ethical production that could be massive? What kind of money are we talking about? Entry level is 500,000 to 2 million per opportunity, depending on the scope and timeline. But Sarah, this isn't like the structured investments you used to handle. Fashion is emotional, unpredictable territory where passion matters as much as profit margins. Trends can change overnight, and what's hot today can be toxic tomorrow. Are you sure you want to get into something this volatile? Sarah met his eyes steadily, and Mike saw something there that reminded him of the woman who'd once managed $60 million portfolios and had never backed down from a challenge. Let's just say I'm diversifying my interests, and I have very specific motivations for wanting to succeed in this particular industry. For the next 2 hours, Mike outlined the underground fashion investment network he'd discovered after leaving Goldman Sachs. It was like learning about a parallel financial universe where creativity mattered as much as quarterly projections, where a single viral moment could transform a struggling artist into a global brand worth hundreds of millions. The key players were small designers who were brilliant but undercapitalized, people who would be grateful for a silent partner with serious money and strategic thinking skills, artists who understood the creative side but needed help with the business fundamentals that separated successful brands from failed dreams. There's this designer in Los Angeles, Mike said, scrolling through his tablet to show Sarah a portfolio that made her breath catch. Elena Vasquez, incredible eye for sustainable luxury fashion, but she's about to lose her studio because she can't scale production. She specializes in pieces that look simple, but are actually architectural masterworks, very wearable art. Sarah studied the designs on Mike's screen, recognizing something in Elena's work that spoke to her on a level deeper than aesthetics. These weren't just clothes. They were statements of power, garments that could transform the wearer from invisible to commanding. How much does she need? 2 million would save her business. 3 million would let her expand into ready-to-wear and compete with the major fashion houses. 5 million would make her a serious player in the luxury market. Sarah nodded, her mind already calculating possibilities and potential returns. Set up a meeting. Slow down, Sarah. These aren't stock portfolios you can just throw money at and expect immediate returns. Fashion is personal, emotional. It's about building relationships and understanding cultural movements. If you're just here to play rich housewife games with your husband's money, I'm not playing anything. Sarah's voice cut through his objections like a blade, sharp enough to make Mike remember why she'd been one of the most feared negotiators on Wall Street. I have access to significant capital that belongs to me, not my husband. I understand risk assessment better than most people in this city, and I have very specific motivations for wanting to succeed in this industry. Can you help me or not? Mike stared at her for a long moment, seeing past the pregnancy and the expensive clothes to the steel underneath. Then he grinned, the same expression he'd worn when they'd closed their biggest deals together. There she is, the woman who used to terrify junior analysts and charm clients into seven-figure deals. I thought David had lobotomized you. Sarah stood to leave, her movements deliberate and controlled despite her advanced pregnancy. David made the mistake of thinking I was decoration. That's going to cost him more than he ever imagined. As she walked to her car, Sarah felt her phone buzz with a text from David. Flight's been moved up. Won't be home tonight. Don't wait up. She didn't bother responding. Instead, she called her private banker, a woman she'd worked with long before she'd met David, and requested access to her grandmother's trust fund, the one David didn't know existed because it had been established before their marriage. The one her grandmother had created with very specific instructions that only Sarah could access, and only for business investments that would secure her independence. $2 million. More than enough to start playing David's game, but with rules he'd never taught her and strategies he'd never imagined his perfect wife could master. Elena Vasquez's studio in downtown Los Angeles occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse, a space that buzzed with the kind of creative energy that made Sarah's forgotten ambitions stir to life. The studio looked like organized chaos to untrained eyes, but Sarah's analytical mind immediately recognized the sophisticated system underlying the apparent disorder. Half-finished garments hung from every available surface, each one at a different stage of Elena's meticulous creative process. Fabric bolts were stacked to the ceiling in carefully organized color gradients that created rainbow walls of potential. Sketches covered every inch of wall space, some rough concepts, others detailed technical drawings that revealed the architectural thinking behind Elena's designs. At the center of it all stood Elena herself, a woman with wild dark hair streaked with premature silver and paint-stained fingers that moved with the precision of a surgeon. She was bent over a sewing machine that looked like it had been rescued from a museum, muttering in rapid Spanish as she guided silk through stitches that would be invisible to anyone wearing the finished garment. Elena looked up when Sarah entered, and Sarah immediately saw genius burning in her exhausted eyes. Frustrated, desperate genius that reminded Sarah of her own reflection during the worst days of her Wall Street career, when she'd been fighting for recognition in a world that preferred its women decorative rather than dangerous. You are the investor Mike told me about. Elena's accent was slight but musical, her English precise despite the fatigue that radiated from her small frame. Forgive me, I expected someone different. Different how? Sarah asked, settling carefully into the only chair in the studio that looked capable of supporting a pregnant woman. Male, older, with more obvious battle scars from corporate warfare? Sarah smiled grimly, recognizing a kindred spirit in Elena's blunt assessment. My scars aren't visible, but they're there. Some of them are still bleeding. For the next hour, Elena showed Sarah her work with the passionate intensity of someone who had poured her entire soul into her craft. Each piece was architectural rather than merely fashionable, sculptural in a way that transformed clothing into wearable art. Her dresses seemed simple until you noticed the precise seaming that created silhouettes of absolute authority. Her coats looked understated until you saw how they moved, transforming the wearer into someone commanding and untouchable. The fashion houses, Elena explained, holding up a jacket that seemed to capture and redistribute light in ways that defied physics. They want me to simplify everything. Mass production, they say. Streamline the construction. Water down the vision until it becomes like everything else cluttering the market. Sarah studied the jacket Elena held, understanding immediately why traditional manufacturers would be intimidated by the complexity of the design. This wasn't clothing that could be produced in factories by workers following simple patterns. Each piece required the kind of individual attention that made mass production impossible and luxury price points inevitable. They want my name, Elena continued, but not my vision. They want to take what makes my work special and turn it into something ordinary that can be sold in department stores. I refuse, so I starve. What if you didn't have to choose? Sarah outlined her proposal carefully, watching Elena's face for reactions that would tell her whether this woman was a potential partner or just another artist who would take investment money and produce nothing commercially viable. Full funding for your studio, complete creative control, but with one condition: I want to be more than a silent partner. I want to learn this business from the ground up. Elena's dark eyes sharpened with interest and suspicion in equal measure. You want to learn, most investors want to teach. They come in here thinking they understand fashion because they buy expensive clothes or read industry magazines. They want to tell me how to make my designs more commercial, more accessible, more like whatever sold well last season. I bring capital and strategic thinking, Sarah said, her voice carrying the confidence she'd forgotten she possessed. You bring artistic vision and manufacturing expertise. We build something that doesn't compromise either element. Elena studied her for a long moment, taking in details that most people would miss. The quality of Sarah's maternity dress, expensive but not flashy, the way she held herself despite her advanced pregnancy, straight-backed and alert rather than the defeated posture of most women in similar circumstances, the intelligence in her questions and the way she looked at the designs with an analyst's eye rather than a shopper's enthusiasm. Why fashion? Elena asked finally. You have money, obviously, education too, from the way you speak. Why not invest in something you already understand technology, maybe, or real estate, or whatever industry made your fortune in the first place? Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about Jessica Romano's Instagram feed and David's carefully planned betrayal, about ultrasound appointments attended alone and boarding passes for trips she wasn't invited to take, about the systematic erasure of her identity and the cold calculation behind her husband's smile. Because fashion is the only industry where a single moment can change everything, Sarah said finally, where art becomes power and power becomes influence, where a woman can transform herself from invisible to impossible to ignore. She paused and placing her hand protectively over her belly where her daughter was growing, despite everything happening around them. I need to understand how that transformation works, not just theoretically, but practically. I need to know how to build something that can't be taken away from me, something that doesn't depend on anyone else's permission or approval. Elena nodded slowly, recognition flickering in her eyes. You're not just looking for investment returns. You're looking for armor. Armor that looks like high fashion, Sarah confirmed. Armor that makes the person wearing it feel powerful enough to face anything. They shook hands on a $3 million deal that would save Elena's business and launch Sarah's transformation into someone David would never see coming. But as Sarah prepared to leave the studio, Elena stopped her with a question that cut straight to the heart of what they were really building together. This man who hurt you, Elena said quietly, does he understand what you're capable of? Sarah thought about David's dismissive texts and his confidence that she would wait quietly at home while he built a new life with a younger woman, about the legal documents planning her destruction and the offshore accounts hiding their shared wealth from her reach. No, Sarah said with a smile that would have terrified anyone who knew her well enough to recognize it. But he's about to get an education. The meeting with Jessica Romano required careful orchestration. Sarah spent days researching Jessica's patterns, studying her Instagram posts for clues about her schedule and preferences. She learned that Jessica favored trendy cafes in Manhattan's West Village, places where she could be photographed looking effortlessly glamorous while conducting what she called business meetings. Sarah chose a specific cafe on a Tuesday afternoon when Jessica's social media activity suggested she'd be in the city. She crafted an email introducing herself as Alexandra Sterling, a talent scout for an emerging luxury fashion brand seeking to collaborate with high-end influencers who embodied authentic luxury rather than manufactured glamour. The response came within 30 minutes, exactly as Sarah had predicted. Jessica was very interested and available for meetings that very week. Sarah arrived at the cafe first, choosing a corner table with good lighting that would be flattering for any photos Jessica might want to take. She wore dark sunglasses and a simple black maternity dress that could belong to any fashion industry professional. Her pregnancy concealed enough that she looked mysteriously successful rather than obviously domestic. Jessica arrived 15 minutes late, which Sarah had expected from studying her social media patterns. Instagram influencers operated on a different timeline than the business world, treating punctuality as less important than making an entrance. She came dressed for content creation rather than business, wearing head-to-toe designer pieces that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, Balenciaga sneakers that retailed for $1,200, a Bottega Veneta bag worth $3,000, Saint Laurent sunglasses pushed up on perfectly highlighted hair that had clearly been styled by professionals that morning. Every detail calculated to convey success and desirability, the kind of careful curation that millions of followers interpreted as effortless perfection. I'm so excited about this opportunity, Jessica gushed before she'd even fully settled into her chair, not bothering with conventional pleasantries. My followers are incredibly engaged and they trust my recommendations completely. When I post about something, they actually buy it, like immediately. My conversion rates are insane. Sarah smiled and pulled out her tablet, displaying analytics she'd researched about Jessica's account. Your engagement rates are impressive. 3.2 million followers with an 8% interaction rate. That's genuinely rare in today's oversaturated market, where most influencers struggle to maintain authentic connection with their audiences. Right. Jessica's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely encountered people who understood her industry beyond surface-level assumptions. And my demographic is perfect for luxury brands. Women aged 22 to 35 with significant disposable income. They're not just following me for entertainment. They want to live the lifestyle I'm showing them. Sarah leaned forward, matching Jessica's energy while carefully studying the young woman who had unknowingly become the center of her marriage's destruction. Up close, Jessica was undeniably beautiful, but Sarah could see the calculation behind every gesture, the careful maintenance required to present herself as effortlessly perfect. My boyfriend, Jessica continued, he's super connected in the business world, like seriously powerful. He's always telling me I should think bigger. Not just post about products other people make, but actually build my own brand. Create something that could become a real empire. Smart boyfriend, Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice neutral while her pulse hammered with the irony of receiving relationship advice about her own husband from his mistress. What kind of brand are you envisioning for the next hour? Jessica outlined her plans with surprising business acumen that made Sarah understand why David had been attracted to her beyond physical beauty. A luxury lifestyle brand targeting young women who wanted to elevate their lives. Clothing that looked expensive but remained accessible to her core demographic. Accessories that conveyed status. Maybe eventually a reality show that would expand her reach beyond Instagram. It was vapid in many ways, but potentially profitable in others. Sarah found herself genuinely impressed by Jessica's grasp of market dynamics and consumer psychology, even as she despised everything else about the situation. The thing is, Jessica continued, leaning forward conspiratorially, I need someone who really understands the luxury market, someone with connections to real designers, not just fast fashion brands that want to slap my name on cheap knockoffs. I want to create something that actual celebrities would wear. Something with real quality and craftsmanship? Sarah leaned forward too, matching Jessica's energy while her mind raced through possibilities. What if I told you I might be able to introduce you to some very exclusive designers, people who work with A-list celebrities and European royalty? That level of clientele. Jessica's eyes widened like a child's on Christmas morning, and Sarah saw genuine excitement there, rather than calculated performance. Are you serious? That would be absolutely life-changing. My followers would lose their minds. The kind of exposure that could generate... I'm very serious, Sarah interrupted gently. But this kind of introduction requires absolute discretion. The designers I work with have built their reputations on exclusivity and word-of-mouth recommendations. They value privacy above everything else, which is why they're able to command the prices they do. Of course, absolutely. I can be super discreet. I understand how that world works. Sarah pulled a contract from her briefcase, something Mike's lawyers had prepared for situations exactly like this. The document looked professional and legitimate, filled with legal language that would intimidate most people into signing without careful review. This is a preliminary agreement, Sarah explained, watching Jessica's face for signs of suspicion that never came. If you sign, I'll arrange meetings with 3 designers who could completely transform your brand trajectory. The only requirement is that you keep our arrangement completely confidential until I give you explicit permission to discuss it publicly. Jessica signed without reading the fine print, her pen moving across signature lines with the confidence of someone who had never encountered serious legal consequences. The same fine print that gave Sarah significant control over any business partnerships Jessica entered through these introductions, along with the right to terminate relationships that didn't meet specified standards of quality and discretion. After Jessica left, practically glowing with excitement about her potential fashion industry connections, Sarah sat in the cafe feeling a dangerous surge of power flowing through her veins. She'd just signed David's mistress to a contract that would allow Sarah to control significant aspects of Jessica's business dealings. The irony was exquisite, but Sarah wasn't finished. She had much bigger plans than simply sabotaging Jessica's Instagram brand. This was just the opening move in a game David had unwittingly taught her to play by example, using strategies he'd never imagined his decorative wife was capable of understanding, much less mastering. That evening, Sarah video called David from their bedroom, wearing one of Elena's early prototype pieces. A deceptively simple black dress that somehow made her look like she could run a Fortune 500 company despite being 8 months pregnant. "You look beautiful," David said, though she could see him glancing at something off camera, probably Jessica, lying in their Parisian hotel bed, wearing lingerie purchased with money from accounts Sarah had helped build during their marriage. "How's the business trip going?" Sarah asked, her voice warm and supportive in exactly the way David expected. "Great, really productive. The European clients are very interested in expanding our data analytics platform into new markets. Fashion market research? Actually, it's a completely untapped sector for us, and the profit margins could be incredible." Sarah's blood went cold as the final piece of David's strategy revealed itself. He wasn't just betraying their marriage and stealing their shared assets. He was planning to enter the fashion industry using the connections he'd made through Jessica, turning his infidelity into a business opportunity that would make him even wealthier while Sarah disappeared into single motherhood. "Fashion market research sounds fascinating," she said carefully, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she revealed how much this revelation devastated her. "Yeah, there's huge money in predicting trend cycles and consumer behavior in luxury markets. If we can crack the algorithm for what makes something go viral versus what makes it sustainable long-term, we could revolutionize how fashion brands allocate their marketing budgets." After they hung up, Sarah stared at her reflection in their bedroom mirror, seeing a woman David no longer recognized but who was becoming someone even Sarah herself was just beginning to understand. The woman looking back was no longer the broken wife David had left behind, but she wasn't yet the force of nature she was determined to become. She pulled out her phone and called Mike with the urgency of someone who had just discovered that the building was on fire and escape routes were rapidly disappearing. "I need to accelerate everything," she said without preamble. "How quickly can we go from design to market with a luxury collection? Sarah, what's wrong? You sound like someone just declared war on you." Sarah looked at the ultrasound photo she kept on her nightstand, then at the empty space where David should have been sleeping, then at her reflection in the mirror, where she could see the woman she was becoming. "Someone did declare war," she said simply, "but they made the mistake of thinking I didn't know how to fight back." The next morning brought what seemed like salvation delivered in an envelope so elegant it belonged in a museum. Victoria Sterling's introduction arrived via private courier, handwritten on cream paper that whispered of old money and older connections. The script was perfect copperplate, the kind taught in expensive boarding schools and maintained through decades of writing thank you notes to society matrons. "Mrs. Mitchell," it read, "I've heard so much about you through mutual friends in the strategic investment community. I'd be honored to meet you for lunch to discuss some opportunities that might interest a woman of your obvious intelligence and business acumen. I have experience helping high net worth individuals navigate complex financial situations, particularly during times of personal transition. Yours truly, Victoria Sterling." Sarah Googled Victoria Sterling and found exactly what she expected to find: a strategic consultant for ultra-high net worth individuals, helping them diversify investments and protect assets during delicate personal circumstances. Her client list read like a directory of tech billionaires and European royalty. Her testimonials praised her discretion, her strategic thinking, and her ability to see financial moves 3 steps ahead of her clients' adversaries. Finally, someone who saw Sarah as more than David's decorative pregnant wife. Someone who recognized her intelligence and understood that she needed strategic guidance rather than sympathy and platitudes about how everything would work out for the best. They met at an exclusive club in Manhattan, where membership cost more than most people's annual salaries, and the waiting list stretched longer than a decade. The dining room existed in a bubble of old-world elegance, where waiters moved like ghosts and conversations happened in whispers that could topple governments or create new ones. Victoria Sterling was everything Sarah had imagined and more. Silver-haired and impeccably dressed, she radiated the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of managing other people's fortunes during their most vulnerable moments. Her handshake was firm, her smile warm, and her eyes sharp enough to see through any deception or emotional manipulation. "You're exactly as impressive as I expected." Victoria said over champagne that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. Sarah declined the alcohol due to her pregnancy, but Victoria's gesture felt like recognition of her sophistication rather than an oversight. I've been following your husband's company through various industry publications, and I must say, some of his recent decisions concern me greatly. Sarah felt a flutter of validation so powerful it made her slightly dizzy. Finally, someone was confirming her concerns instead of telling her to be more supportive and understanding of her husband's business pressures. What kind of decisions? Sarah asked, leaning forward with the eagerness of someone who had been starved for intelligent conversation about the realities of her situation. Expanding too quickly into unfamiliar markets? Taking on risky partnerships based on personal relationships rather than solid business analysis. When successful men hit middle age, they often make terrible financial decisions because they start thinking with their egos instead of their brains. Victoria's assessment cut straight to the heart of what Sarah had been observing, but hadn't known how to articulate. David's behavior wasn't just personal betrayal, it was business recklessness that threatened everything they'd built together, using company resources to fund romantic adventures that had no strategic value for cloud tech industries. What would you recommend? Sarah asked, desperate for guidance from someone who understood both the personal and financial dimensions of her crisis. Protection, Victoria said simply, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had navigated similar situations countless times before. We need to protect your interests and your baby's future. I can help you establish some financial independence. Create safeguards that your husband can't touch or manipulate, regardless of what happens with your marriage. Over the next 3 hours, Victoria outlined a strategy that seemed almost too good to be true. Offshore accounts that would shelter Sarah's assets from divorce proceedings, trust funds that would ensure her daughter's security even if David attempted to use custody as financial leverage, investment vehicles that would allow Sarah to build her own fortune independent of anything David could control or destroy. For the first time in months, Sarah felt hope blooming in her chest like flowers after a long winter. Victoria understood the complexities of her situation in ways that Mike, with all his Wall Street experience, simply couldn't grasp. This wasn't just about making money. This was about survival and independence in a world where powerful men could destroy their wives' lives with strategic precision. The key, Victoria explained, is to move quickly but quietly. Your husband is obviously planning something, based on the financial patterns I've identified through my research. We need to establish your position before he realizes you're no longer the passive victim he expects you to remain. As they parted ways, Victoria handed Sarah another cream envelope containing a preliminary agreement outlining their partnership. The terms seemed incredibly generous, with Victoria taking a smaller percentage than most strategic consultants would demand and offering services that went far beyond simple investment advice. Sarah was so grateful to have found such a sophisticated ally that she signed the agreement in the car outside the club, not bothering with the careful legal review she would have insisted on during her Wall Street days. Victoria had demonstrated such deep understanding of her situation and such genuine concern for her welfare that detailed scrutiny seemed unnecessary and potentially insulting. I'll be in touch soon with our first moves, Victoria had said, squeezing Sarah's hand with maternal warmth. You're not alone in this anymore. Together, we're going to ensure your independence and your daughter's security, regardless of what your husband thinks he can do to control your future. Sarah drove home through Connecticut's autumn landscape feeling lighter than she had since discovering David's betrayal. She had Elena designing revolutionary fashion pieces that would establish her credibility in a new industry. She had Mike managing investment strategies that would multiply her grandmother's trust fund into serious wealth. And now she had Victoria protecting her financial interests with the kind of sophisticated planning that David's lawyers would never see coming. That night, she called Elena with updates about accelerating their timeline and increasing their investment in production capacity. They worked until midnight refining designs, scheduling manufacturing meetings, and planning their market entry strategy. By the time Sarah fell asleep, she was dreaming of fashion shows and business empires built on principles of ethical production and sustainable growth. The next morning brought a text from Victoria that made Sarah's heart sing with anticipation. Everything is in motion. Trust the process completely. You're going to be amazed by what we accomplished together. Sarah spent the day preparing for David's early return from Paris, which he'd announced suddenly the night before. She cleaned their house until it gleamed, stocked his favorite foods, and even bought new lingerie despite her advanced pregnancy. She wanted to look like the perfect wife while secretly building an empire that would ensure she never had to depend on any man's approval or generosity again. David arrived home with flowers and elaborate apologies, playing the part of the repentant husband with Academy Award-worthy performance skills. Sarah played along perfectly, accepting his gifts and listening to his carefully edited stories about successful business meetings in Paris. He never mentioned Jessica directly, but Sarah caught him checking his phone constantly, probably reading texts from his Instagram mistress about when they could see each other again. That night, as David slept peacefully beside her, Sarah reviewed her business plans on her laptop with the satisfaction of someone who had finally taken control of her own destiny. Elena's designs were revolutionary enough to attract serious attention from fashion industry leaders. Mike's investment strategy was sophisticated enough to generate the returns they needed for rapid expansion. Victoria's protection plan would ensure Sarah's independence regardless of what David thought he could do to destroy her. Everything was falling into place with the kind of precision that only came from careful planning and strategic thinking. Too perfectly, as Sarah would soon discover. Because the most dangerous traps were the ones that looked like salvation. And the most devastating betrayals came from the people who claimed to be protecting you from betrayal. The first crack in Sarah's perfect plan appeared on a Tuesday morning disguised as the best news possible. Elena called while Sarah was reviewing financial projections, her voice vibrating with excitement that made Sarah smile despite her exhaustion. "Sarah, we have a problem. A wonderful, terrible, life-changing problem." "What kind of problem?" Sarah asked, setting down her coffee and giving Elena her full attention. "Vogue wants to feature 3 pieces from our collection in their September issue. Anna Wintour herself saw the prototypes at a private showing yesterday and called our line the most important new voice in American fashion. This could make us a global brand overnight." Sarah's smile died as ice water flooded her veins. "Elena, we haven't scheduled any private showings. Our collection wasn't supposed to launch for another 6 weeks. Victoria Sterling arranged it. She said she wanted to help accelerate our timeline, that she had connections who could fast-track our success in ways that would take years to achieve through traditional channels." "Sarah, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. Do you understand what Vogue coverage means for a new designer?" Sarah's vision blurred as the trap revealed itself with surgical precision. Victoria Sterling, who was supposed to be protecting Sarah's interests and ensuring her financial independence, had just exposed her fashion investment to the most influential publication in the world. This would make headlines in every business journal David read, every industry newsletter his competitors analyzed, every trade publication his board of directors reviewed for emerging market opportunities. "Elena, we need to pull out of the Vogue feature immediately." "What?" Elena's voice cracked with disbelief. "Sarah, this is insane. Do you know what this kind of exposure could do for us? For you, this is the break every designer dreams about. This is what separates successful brands from beautiful failures." But it was already too late, as Sarah discovered when she called Vogue's fashion director 30 minutes later. The magazine had already committed to featuring their collection in a spread that would be seen by millions of readers worldwide. The September issue was going to print in 5 days, and contractual obligations made withdrawal impossible without legal consequences that would destroy their reputation before they'd even established one. Sarah would be exposed as a serious fashion investor just as David returned from his extended Parisian vacation with Jessica, armed with new business plans that would directly compete with everything Sarah was building. The second catastrophe arrived via FedEx that afternoon, delivered with the kind of professional efficiency that made devastating news feel routine. Divorce papers, bound in expensive leather and stamped with legal seals that made them look like death certificates for her marriage. David was filing for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences and financial irresponsibility. The petition painted Sarah as an unstable woman whose pregnancy had triggered dangerous decision-making and reckless spending that threatened their family's financial security. He was seeking sole custody of their unborn child, citing her recent erratic behavior and questionable investment decisions as evidence of her unfitness as a mother. Attached to the filing was a request for immediate psychological evaluation, asking the court to determine Sarah's mental competency based on her concerning financial behavior and emotional instability during pregnancy. The supporting documentation included bank statements showing her investments in Elena's fashion company, presented as evidence of delusional thinking and poor judgment. Sarah sat in her pristine living room, surrounded by legal documents that dissected her life like a failed business merger. Each page revealing how thoroughly David had planned her destruction. He had turned their marriage into a hostile takeover with their daughter as the primary asset to be acquired, using her own attempts at independence as weapons against her. The third catastrophe came via a phone call that should never have existed in Sarah's world. Jessica Romano's number appeared on her screen at 8 o'clock that evening, and Sarah answered with the kind of morbid curiosity that compelled people to stare at car accidents. "Hi, this is super weird, but I think we need to talk," Jessica said, her voice tight with anxiety and confusion. "Tyler told me some really disturbing things about you, and I'm starting to think maybe I've been lied to about some stuff." "Tyler," Sarah's mind reeled as another layer of David's deception revealed itself. "My husband's name isn't Tyler." A long pause filled with the sound of Jessica's world imploding alongside Sarah's. "Wait, your husband isn't Tyler Morrison, tech billionaire, owns Cloud Tech Industries, has that amazing house in Connecticut?" "No," Sarah said slowly, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "My husband is David Mitchell. He owns Cloud Tech Industries, but his name is David, not Tyler." The silence stretched between them like a chasm opening in the earth, swallowing everything both women thought they knew about their relationships with the same man. "He told me his name was Tyler Morrison and that he was getting divorced from his crazy wife who was trying to sabotage his business," Jessica whispered, her voice breaking with the realization that she had been as thoroughly manipulated as Sarah. "He said you were mentally unstable and that you'd been stalking me through fake business deals, trying to destroy my career because you were jealous of our relationship." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the final piece of David's masterful game clicking into place with the precision of a Swiss watch. He had been lying to Jessica too, creating an entirely fictional identity that allowed him to paint Sarah as the villain in everyone's story. He was building a narrative where Sarah was dangerous, unstable, and vindictive, justifying his need to protect both Jessica and their unborn child from her destructive influence. "Jessica, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you pregnant?" Another pause that contained entire universes of betrayal and manipulation. "How did you know yes about 12 weeks? Tyler said we were going to start a family together as soon as his divorce was finalized, and you couldn't use the baby to manipulate him anymore." Sarah hung up and walked to her bedroom window, looking out over Connecticut's rolling hills, where normal families lived normal lives with normal problems. Her husband had been living a double life so elaborate that even his mistress didn't know his real name. He was planning to take her child, destroy her business reputation, and start fresh with a woman young enough to be his daughter who was carrying his second child. But David had made one crucial mistake in his elaborate web of deception. He had taught Sarah exactly how ruthless and strategic a person needed to become to survive in a world where love was a luxury and trust was a liability. As Sarah stood at her window with her hands protectively covering her belly, she realized that David had unknowingly given her the greatest gift possible, a masterclass in manipulation, strategic thinking, and the kind of cold calculation required to destroy someone completely while maintaining the appearance of innocence. The student was about to become the teacher, and David was going to learn that underestimating Sarah Mitchell had been the most expensive mistake of his life. The fourth catastrophe struck at 3 in the morning when sharp pains in Sarah's abdomen jerked her awake, followed by the warm wetness that meant something was terribly wrong with her pregnancy. She drove herself to the hospital through empty streets, David's phone going straight to voicemail in whatever Parisian hotel room he was sharing with Jessica. Both of them probably too exhausted from celebrating their future together to answer emergency calls from his inconvenient wife. In the emergency room, doctors spoke in the careful voices medical professionals used when things might go very wrong very quickly. Sarah lay on a gurney while machines monitored her baby's heartbeat and her own elevated blood pressure, numbers that told a story of stress and fear that her body could no longer contain. "Mrs. Mitchell," Dr. Rodriguez said gently, her voice carrying the kind of compassion that came from delivering bad news to desperate people. "We've managed to stop the bleeding, but your blood pressure is dangerously high and you're showing signs of severe stress-induced complications. You're now officially high risk, and any additional emotional trauma could trigger premature labor or worse. Sarah nodded, absorbing this information with the same analytical precision she'd once applied to market crashes and corporate failures. Stress was threatening her daughter's life, which meant David's psychological warfare was literally endangering the child he claimed to want custody of. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't potentially deadly. I'm prescribing complete bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy, Dr. Rodriguez continued, and I strongly recommend eliminating any sources of stress from your environment. Your baby's survival depends on your emotional and physical stability. When David finally called back 6 hours later, Sarah could hear music and laughter in the background, the sounds of people having a wonderful time while she lay in a hospital bed, afraid of losing their child. Jesus, Sarah, are you okay? Is the baby okay? I just got your messages. We're stable, she said, her voice flat with exhaustion. For now, should I come home, I can catch a red-eye tonight. But I'm in the middle of these crucial negotiations that could determine CloudTech's entire European expansion strategy. Don't bother, Sarah said, hanging up before David could finish explaining why closing a business deal was more important than his wife and unborn child's lives. But lying in that hospital bed with monitors beeping around her and her daughter's heartbeat steady despite everything happening around them, Sarah realized something that changed everything. David had successfully isolated her from every source of conventional help, but he had also underestimated her ability to find unconventional allies in places he would never think to look. 2 days later, against doctor's orders but with careful planning, Sarah drove to the converted warehouse in Queens, where Mike had first introduced her to the underground fashion investment network. She needed allies who operated outside David's sphere of influence. People who understood that sometimes the most important battles were fought in shadows rather than courtrooms. The warehouse thrummed with creative energy that felt like electricity coursing through her veins. Designers, models, investors, and industry insiders filled the converted space. People who built empires while traditional fashion houses were still deciding what to have for lunch. These were individuals who understood that real power came from controlling culture rather than just capital. Sarah wore one of Elena's prototype pieces, a deceptively simple black coat that looked unremarkable until you understood how it transformed the wearer's silhouette into something commanding and untouchable. At 8 months pregnant, she should have looked vulnerable and desperate. Instead, she looked like a force of nature who happened to be carrying the future in her arms. Elena found her near the makeshift runway, her face twisted with concern and confusion that made Sarah's heart ache with the realization that David's manipulation had spread even here. Sarah, what are you doing here? Victoria Sterling called me yesterday. She's worried about your mental state and says your husband is concerned about your fitness as a mother. She thinks you're having some kind of breakdown related to your pregnancy and that your investment decisions are becoming increasingly erratic. Sarah smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who had finally understood the game being played and was ready to play it better than anyone else. Elena, Victoria Sterling isn't who she claims to be, and neither is my husband. We need to talk, and I need you to listen very carefully to everything I'm about to tell you. For the next hour, Sarah laid out the truth with the methodical precision of a prosecutor building a case. David's real name, his systematic financial abuse, his affair with Jessica Romano under a false identity, and Victoria Sterling's role as his accomplice in a scheme designed to destroy Sarah's credibility while stealing her assets and her child. She showed Elena the divorce papers, the custody demands, and the evidence of David's embezzlement of company funds to finance his double life. She played recordings of phone calls and displayed email screenshots that painted a clear picture of conspiracy and manipulation that went far beyond simple infidelity. Elena's face grew darker with each revelation, her artistic sensibilities offended by the calculated cruelty of what David and Victoria had orchestrated. I've seen this before, she said finally, her voice tight with anger. Powerful men who think they can buy and sell people like accessories. They always underestimate the women they try to destroy. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Elena something she'd discovered during her sleepless night in the hospital, Victoria Sterling's real background, obtained through Mike's private investigator and cross-referenced with corporate filings that revealed the truth about her business relationships. Victoria isn't just David's accomplice, Sarah explained. She's his business partner in a shell company that's been acquiring fashion industry assets for the past 8 months. She's also the person who's been funding Jessica Romano's lifestyle brand launch using money David embezzled from CloudTech. Everything that's happened to me has been orchestrated by people who are supposed to be protecting my interests. Elena studied the documents with her designer's eye for detail, catching subtleties that others might miss. "There's something else," she said slowly. "That private showing Victoria arranged with Vogue, the one that's supposed to feature our collection, she didn't show them our new designs." "What do you mean she showed them pieces from my previous collections? Designs I created years ago, before we partnered together. She's been representing herself as my business manager to fashion houses, selling my work without my permission and keeping the profits." Sarah felt the familiar surge of cold calculation flooding her system, the same analytical fury that had made her dangerous on Wall Street. Victoria had been playing multiple games simultaneously, manipulating Sarah, stealing from Elena, and profiting from both their talents while setting them up to destroy each other. But now Sarah had something David and Victoria had never expected her to find: an ally who understood exactly what kind of war they were fighting and had her own reasons for wanting to win it. Elena pulled out her phone and scrolled through months of carefully documented evidence she'd been building without Sarah's knowledge. Every stolen design, every unauthorized sale, every contract signed in her name without her permission. She'd been preparing for this battle long before she'd met Sarah. "I've been building a case against fashion industry theft for 2 years," Elena said, her voice carrying the quiet intensity of someone who had been systematically wronged but was finally ready to fight back. "I just never had the resources or legal power to take on people with serious money and connections." Sarah smiled, and this time it was genuine, warm, and absolutely terrifying to anyone who might be on the receiving end of what she was planning. "Now you do. Elena, how would you like to take down everyone who's stolen from you and make them pay for it in the most public, devastating way possible? What are you thinking? Social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, every platform where your story can go viral faster than their lawyers can stop it. We're going to expose the entire network of fashion industry exploitation, starting with David Mitchell, Victoria Sterling, and Jessica Romano." Elena grinned with the kind of dangerous creativity that had made her a rising star in the fashion world before powerful people had tried to steal her work and destroy her career. "Now that," she said, "would break the internet." They spent the next 6 hours planning their counterattack with the precision of generals preparing for the most important battle of their lives. Elena would create content exposing the stolen designs with side-by-side comparisons that made the theft undeniable to anyone with eyes. Sarah would provide the financial receipts showing David's embezzlement and Victoria's fraud. Together, they would create a narrative that turned Sarah from villain to victim, Elena from struggling artist to crusading hero, and David from successful CEO to criminal defendant. But their real weapon wasn't social media or legal documentation. It was something much more powerful: the truth, presented by two women who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain from destroying the people who had tried to destroy them first. Elena's TikTok went live at 6 a.m. Eastern Time on a Thursday morning, timed precisely for maximum impact when her target demographic would be scrolling through their phones during their morning commutes. Sarah watched from her Connecticut kitchen as the view count climbed from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands in real time, her heart pounding with the exhilaration of watching a carefully planned demolition unfold exactly as designed. The video was devastating in its simplicity, Elena side by side with Jessica Romano's Instagram posts, showing identical designs with timestamps proving Elena had created them first, sometimes by years. Elena's voice was calm, professional, and absolutely furious as she explained how her work had been stolen, repackaged, and sold to finance a billionaire's affair. "When you spend years creating art only to see it stolen by influencers and the powerful men who fund them," Elena said directly to the camera, "you realize that justice doesn't come from the legal system. It comes from people who care about right and wrong. This is my story, but it's also the story of every creative person who's been exploited by people with more money than morals." The caption was perfect. "Fashion theft is real. Share if you believe artists deserve credit for their work. Hashtag fashion theft. Hashtag justice for creators. Hashtag expose the truth." By 8 a.m., the video had 500,000 views. By 10 a.m., it had 2 million views and celebrity reposts from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rihanna, and Taylor Swift. By noon, It had 10 million views and had been picked up by every major news outlet in the country. The comments section exploded with users sharing their own stories of creative theft and corporate exploitation, turning Elena's individual case into a movement. But Elena's video was just the opening act in Sarah's carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction. Sarah's contribution went live at 1 p.m., a 30-minute YouTube video titled "The Billionaire's Wife Tells All: Financial Abuse, Identity Theft, and the Fashion Industry Scandal You Need to Know About." She appeared on camera for the first time in months. No longer the polished billionaire's wife, but a woman with nothing to hide and everything to expose. She told her story with the precision of the financial analyst she used to be, presenting evidence like a prosecutor building an airtight case. David's embezzlement of cloud tech funds to finance Jessica's career, Victoria Sterling's systematic fraud and identity manipulation, the network of shell companies designed to steal assets and destroy reputations while maintaining the appearance of legitimate business practices. The video included devastating moments that made viewers understand the personal cost of financial abuse. Sarah playing David's voicemail from her hospital stay, his voice dismissive and distracted as he explained why his business meeting was more important than his wife's medical emergency. Screenshots of text messages showing his lies about Jessica. Bank statements proving that he'd been using company money to fund a lifestyle brand for his pregnant mistress while planning to take custody of Sarah's child. But the most powerful moment came when Sarah addressed the camera directly, her hands resting on her pregnant belly. If you're a woman watching this, you need to understand that financial abuse is real, identity theft is real, and powerful people will absolutely destroy you if you let them. But you also need to understand that you're more powerful than you think. You're smarter than they assume. And when you stop being afraid and start getting strategic, you can beat them at their own game. By evening, Sarah's video had 15 million views and had been featured on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and every major online publication. The Wall Street Journal published an emergency investigation into cloud tech industry's financial practices. The Securities and Exchange Commission announced they were opening an investigation into potential securities fraud. The FBI confirmed they were reviewing evidence of wire fraud and identity theft. Jessica Romano's Instagram account went private, then disappeared entirely as death threats flooded in from Elena's supporters. Victoria Sterling's consulting firm's website crashed under the traffic from people trying to identify her other victims. CloudTech's stock price plummeted 40% in after-hours trading as investors fled anything associated with David Mitchell's name. David's phone had been ringing nonstop since dawn, with calls from CloudTech's board of directors, investors, federal investigators, and reporters seeking comment on allegations that were destroying his reputation in real time. Sarah watched from her bedroom window as news vans pulled up to their circular driveway and reporters set up cameras on their front lawn, turning their private residence into the epicenter of a financial scandal that was dominating news cycles. When David finally came home that evening, he looked like a man whose world had collapsed in a single day. His Armani suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his eyes wild with the kind of panic that came from watching a carefully built empire crumble while the entire world watched and cheered. "Sarah, what the hell have you done?" he demanded, bursting into their bedroom where she sat calmly reviewing legal documents prepared by attorneys who specialized in financial fraud cases. "I told the truth," she said without looking up from a contract that would transfer Elena's stolen designs back to her rightful ownership. "Something you seem to have forgotten how to do? You've destroyed everything we built together." Sarah finally looked at him. This man who had shared her bed while planning to steal her child and disappear with his pregnant mistress using money embezzled from his own company. "We didn't build anything together. David, you built an empire on lies and theft while I provided decoration and legitimacy. The difference is, my foundation is solid because it's based on truth." David's phone buzzed with another call from his criminal defense attorney. As he answered it, Sarah could hear the panic in his voice as he tried to explain financial transactions that couldn't be explained, business relationships that couldn't be justified, and personal decisions that had just become federal crimes with maximum sentences that would keep him in prison until their daughter graduated from college. The next morning brought news that made Sarah smile with genuine satisfaction for the first time in months. Cloud Tech Industries stock had lost 70% of its value overnight. The board of directors had called an emergency meeting to discuss David's immediate removal as CEO. Jessica Romano had been dropped by every brand sponsor and was reportedly in hiding at her parents' house in Miami. Victoria Sterling had fled the country, but extradition proceedings were already in motion. Most importantly, Mike called with updates from the federal investigators who were freezing David's assets faster than his lawyers could move them to offshore accounts. "They're locking down everything in his name," Mike reported with barely contained glee. "The house, the cars, the business accounts, the offshore shell companies, everything. Plus, they're treating this as organized crime now because of the conspiracy elements with Victoria Sterling." What about the divorce proceedings? On hold indefinitely. No judge is going to award custody to someone under federal investigation for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. "You and Emma are safe. Sarah, completely safe." Sarah sat in her bedroom, surrounded by the debris of her old life and the blueprints for her new empire, watching news reporters discuss her case on television while her daughter moved peacefully in her womb. Outside, photographers documented the fall of David Mitchell's empire while inside. Sarah planned the rise of her own. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "The TikTok has 50 million views now, and counting. 3 major fashion houses have called about collaborations. Vogue wants to do a profile on our ethical business practices. We did it, Sarah. We actually did it." Sarah smiled, placing her hand on her belly where her daughter was still growing strong, despite everything they'd endured together. "No," she texted back. "We survived it. Now we build something better." 6 months after giving birth to Emma, Grace Mitchell in a delivery room where David was notably absent, Sarah stood in Elena's completely transformed Los Angeles studio, watching seamstresses put finishing touches on their spring collection. The space had evolved from organized chaos into a temple of ethical fashion, complete with fair trade materials sourced from women-owned cooperatives, living wages for all workers, and a waiting list that included Supreme Court justices, Hollywood A-listers, and tech CEOs who wanted to associate themselves with a brand that represented integrity rather than exploitation. Sarah wore the collection's centerpiece, a deep burgundy coat that seemed simple until you understood its true purpose. This wasn't just a garment designed to keep someone warm or make them look fashionable. It was armor for women who had learned to weaponize being underestimated, clothing that transformed the wearer from invisible to impossible to ignore. Elena approached with a tablet displaying their latest financial projections, numbers that would have seemed impossible just 18 months earlier when they'd been fighting for survival against people who had tried to destroy them both. Klein Mitchell Industries is now valued at $200 million, Elena announced with the satisfaction of someone who had survived attempted annihilation and emerged stronger than before. "We have partnerships across 3 continents, manufacturing relationships with 12 women-owned cooperatives, and a social impact program that has helped over 200 female entrepreneurs escape exploitative contracts and build independent businesses." Sarah looked out at the crowd gathering for their runway show, spotting faces she recognized from business journals and red carpets. People who represented not just the fashion industry's present, but its future. In the back row, almost hidden behind dark sunglasses and a baseball cap, sat Jessica Romano. Her Instagram empire had crumbled completely, but Jessica had managed to rebuild herself as an advocate for creator rights and corporate transparency, using her remaining platform to expose the exploitation she had unknowingly perpetuated. She'd testified before Congress about social media manipulation and had started a nonprofit helping young influencers understand the legal and financial implications of brand partnerships. Her relationship with David had ended the day she'd learned his real name, and she'd become an unlikely ally in exposing the network of fraud that had victimized them both. David was notably absent from today's celebration and would be for the next 14 months while he served his federal sentence for embezzlement, securities fraud, and conspiracy. His tech empire had been dissolved and his assets distributed among the investors he'd defrauded, though the victims would never recover everything he'd stolen. Victoria Sterling had been extradited from Switzerland and was awaiting trial for her role in the conspiracy, her client list providing federal investigators with evidence of similar schemes targeting other wealthy women. Emma gurgled happily in Sarah's arms, dressed in a miniature version of Elena's designs that had been featured in Vogue's Future of Fashion issue, alongside a profile of Klein Mitchell Industries as a model for ethical business practices in an industry notorious for exploitation. At 6 months old, Emma was already showing signs of her mother's determination and her maternal great-grandmother's artistic sensibilities. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice echoed through the venue, "please welcome the CEO and co-founder of Klein Mitchell Industries, Sarah Reynolds Mitchell." Sarah walked onto the runway carrying her daughter, her burgundy coat flowing behind her like a cape of victory. The audience rose in a standing ovation that felt like vindication made audible, the sound of hundreds of people who understood that they were witnessing more than just a fashion show. They were seeing the triumph of truth over manipulation, creativity over exploitation, and the kind of justice that could only be achieved when women refused to remain silent about the systems designed to destroy them. At the microphone, Sarah looked out over the crowd of people who represented not just the fashion industry's elite, but its conscience and its future. She could see reporters from major publications, buyers from luxury department stores, and influencers who had built their careers on authenticity rather than stolen content. 18 months ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the venue, I was told I was just a pregnant housewife whose only value was in being quiet and supportive, while more important people made decisions about my life and my future. Today, Klein Mitchell Industries is proof that the most dangerous person in any room is the one whose strength you consistently fail to recognize. She paused, her eyes finding the empty seats where David and Victoria should have been if they hadn't been serving federal prison sentences for their crimes. I learned something crucial during those months when everyone thought I was broken and helpless. The woman you dismiss as decoration might be the architect of your destruction. But more importantly, she might also be the architect of something beautiful, something sustainable, something that changes the world for the better, rather than just extracting profit from other people's talents and dreams. The applause was thunderous, lasting for several minutes as the fashion industry's power players celebrated not just Sarah's success, but the broader message her story represented. She had proven that victims could become victors, that the underestimated could become unstoppable, and that sometimes the best response to systematic betrayal was building something so successful and ethical that it made the betrayer's crimes look even more pathetic by comparison. Sarah smiled and walked back down the runway, her daughter secure in her arms and her empire secure beneath her feet, built on a foundation of truth that no amount of manipulation or legal maneuvering could ever destroy. After the show, Sarah sat in her hotel suite fielding calls from business partners around the world, while Emma played on a blanket nearby, surrounded by fabric samples and design sketches that would become next season's collection. The requests for partnerships and collaborations were overwhelming. Sustainable fashion cooperatives wanting investment, young designers seeking mentorship, and major retailers hoping to associate their brands with Klein Mitchell's reputation for ethical business practices. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that she immediately recognized as David's, probably sent from the federal prison, where he was learning that actions had consequences and that some mistakes couldn't be fixed with charm and expensive lawyers. Can we please talk? I know I made terrible mistakes, but Emma deserves to have her father in her life. I'm a different person now, and I want to make things right. Sarah looked at her daughter, who had David's eyes but Sarah's determined chin, and considered her response carefully. Emma would indeed have her father in her life eventually, but it would be on Sarah's terms, and only after David had proven that he understood the difference between making mistakes and committing crimes, between asking for forgiveness and earning it through sustained behavior change. She typed back, "You can apply for supervised visitation after you complete your sentence and mandatory counseling. Emma will know her father, but only when I'm confident that knowing him won't teach her that love means accepting betrayal or that family means tolerating abuse." Then Sarah blocked the number and added a new contact to her phone. Emma's future. She transferred another $15 million into the trust fund that would ensure her daughter never had to choose between independence and security, never had to remain silent about abuse to preserve financial stability, and never had to accept being underestimated as the price of being loved. As the sun set over Los Angeles, Sarah stood on her balcony overlooking the city where fashion empires were built and destroyed daily, where dreams came true and nightmares ended, where women like her were learning that they were more powerful than they'd ever been allowed to believe. She'd entered this world as a broken woman seeking revenge and emerged as a force that was reshaping how an entire industry thought about power, ethics, creativity, and the true meaning of success. Elena had become one of the most celebrated designers of her generation. Jessica had found her voice as an advocate for creator rights. Even Victoria Sterling's victims were being compensated through a fund Sarah had established using the proceeds from liquidating David's seized assets. Emma stirred in her arms, and Sarah whispered the words she wished someone had told her during those dark months when everything seemed hopeless. Never let anyone convince you that being underestimated is weakness. Little one, sometimes it's the greatest advantage you'll ever have. And when people try to destroy you, remember that survivors don't just rebuild, they build better. Below them, Los Angeles glittered with the lights of ambition and possibility, dreams and determination, the endless cycle of creation and destruction that made the city both beautiful and dangerous. Sarah Mitchell had learned to turn betrayal into empire, heartbreak into armor, and silence into the most powerful weapon of all. The billionaire who took his mistress to Fashion Week had lost everything to the pregnant wife he thought was powerless. But Sarah's victory was bigger than revenge, more lasting than punishment, and more meaningful than justice. She had built something that would outlast any betrayal, empower countless other women, and prove that sometimes the best response to being underestimated was to become absolutely, undeniably, unstoppably successful. Some lessons, Sarah reflected as she held her daughter close and watched the city sparkle below them, were worth every moment of pain it took to learn them. And some empires were worth building from the ashes of someone else's destruction, especially when those ashes could be transformed into foundations strong enough to support generations of women who refused to be decoration, refused to be silent, and refused to accept that their value was determined by anyone other than themselves. Sarah Mitchell proved that being underestimated isn't a weakness, it's a weapon. From a broken marriage to a $200 million empire, her story shows us that sometimes our greatest defeats become the foundation for our most extraordinary victories. If this story inspired you, motivated you, or just completely blew your mind, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what you would have done in Sarah's position. Would you have fought back like she did, or would you have chosen a different path? Your perspective matters, and I read every single comment. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because stories like this, about real people overcoming impossible odds and building something amazing from the ashes of betrayal, these are the stories that need to be told. Share this with someone who needs to remember their own power. Trust me, they'll thank you for it. What story should we dive into next? Drop your suggestions below. And remember, never let anyone convince you that being quiet means being powerless. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones nobody sees coming.